Welcome to ciplantgo, a podcast aimed at introducing people living a plant-based lifestyle in Japan. For this episode, I interviewed Pascal Rosier, businessman running the company Business Wire and one of the most passionate vegan I have met in Japan. In addition to being very smart, Pascal speaks more than 5 languages. He's also tall, quite muscular, and always displays a very compassionate smile upon his face, which illustrates his love for all living beings. The few short discussions I had with him during Tokyo Vegan meetups made me eager to hear more about his story, so I naturally asked him to be on the podcast. This interview is mostly centered around Pascal's story from childhood to his life in Japan. On the way, we make brief stops about his current job, children and their motivation to learn, the importance of role models, the value of traveling to gain new perspectives, the experience of living in Japan as a foreigner, the challenges of being the only vegan among your intimate social circle, mock animal products, and the rise of veganism worldwide. Pascal's story was very interesting to me. It was a very valuable learning experience to hear him share his views, their origin, and how they came to be. I hope you will find our lengthy discussion as enjoyable as I did. Without further ado, here is Pascal Rosier. Thank you for being on the podcast. That's great.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. And could you just quickly present yourself and maybe what you're doing here before I will definitely ask you about how you came to be here? But
to Japan, right?
Yeah. But maybe
okay.
just start by what you're doing here.
Sure. So my name is Pascal, and I'm French from the French Caribbean island of Martinique. Mm-hmm. But I grew up in Germany. I grew up in Europe, and I spent most of my childhood in Germany. I don't know if you know the Black Forest, the Schwarzwald.
Is that in the south, right?
It's in the south. Yeah. It's a beautiful area, and I was really, really close to the forest. So I grew up with the woods, with rabbits.
There's a cake named after the forest, isn't it?
I
think there's a cake named after the forest. I had that as a kid several times.
It's very
creamy.
Very creamy, and also the chocolate taste is very strong.
Yeah, and they have like cherries and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's something. It's really for kids. So when I was a kid, I didn't like it. Schwarzwald, Forêt Noire, that's right. Yeah. And so I came to Japan. I came back to Japan 12 years ago, and I've been in Tokyo since 12 years ago. And I'm a businessman. I work in business. I run a company, an American company called Business Wire. Business Wire is part of the Berkshire Hathaway Group, which is Warren Buffett's group. And I just moved to this company 3 months ago to run their Asia business. So I'm the general manager for the Asia business, and my role is to develop the business in Asia. But before that, I worked for 5 years for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And before, I was in Bloomberg. So I've always been in media and data and news and information because that's really what I like. That's what I'm doing. I have a team in Japan. I speak Japanese. I speak and read and write Japanese, which is why I'm able to run and direct a Japanese business, and that's why I was chosen to do that job. I don't know if that's all right.
That's cool. So keep going. I can definitely jump in and ask some questions. I'm actually, it's easier to listen to, and you might know that from listening to podcasts as well. Podcasts when we go kind of in order-ish. Kind of thing. So going back to your origins there, so you're born in La Martinique and then you're moving to Germany. Was that like as a kid, right?
Sure.
Do you have like around what age do you remember?
Sure. Okay, so I was actually born in Germany.
Oh, is that so?
And I was born in a city called Trier.
Okay.
Trier, which is close to Belgium and Luxembourg.
All right.
It's an amazing city because it's the oldest city of Germany. It's considered as the oldest city of modern city of Germany because it's a Roman type of city. It was the outpost of the Roman Empire in Germany. So you still have the historical foundations, and that was my playground basically. My father would take me to the arena, and I would play there, playing with lizards and playing with insects, and it's also where Karl Marx was born. So it was a bit funny. You had a lot of tourists there, in particular Chinese tourists who would come to pay a tribute to Karl Marx. I don't know if he would agree with that, but I spent almost 11 years in Trier before moving to other cities. But my relationship with Martinique and the Caribbean is very strong, probably because I didn't grow up in France. So I had a direct connection with Martinique, and my parents also were sort of isolated from France. So the French cultural component was not as strong in our family. We were more influenced by Germany, and my parents had many friends of different nationalities. Both could speak German. And at home, it would be 90% Creole, and then the rest would be French and some German. But the influence of Martinique was very strong, but I could speak the language, and I could understand and speak. And my father and parents would take me to Martinique almost every year or 2 years. So I would have strong bridges with the Caribbean, and I think I'm very grateful for that because it allowed me to go deeper into my culture.
All right, and could you share with us what brought your parents then to Germany or?
Sure.
Israel?
My father used to work for the army, so he was first in the army. So he was sent to Germany by the French government in the 70s. It's quite an interesting story, actually, because in the 70s you had strong liberation movements across the different overseas territories of France, and Martinique was one of them. And you had a huge male population in these islands. And France saw a lot of risk in this male population, so it took a strategy, a very smart strategy in a sense, because it definitely worked, in order to avoid any strong movements of independence. So France took most males from the island and shipped them over different locations across the globe where it had military forces. So basically France, Germany, Africa, and other South America, Guyana. But basically the goal was to split them and mix them over. But it didn't do that just for Martinique. It did it also for the rest of France, and in particular for places where there were potential subversive movements, and Corsica is one of them. My father was part of that. So he crossed the sea, and he was an adventurer, so he really loved the idea of doing it. But he always told me about the cultural shock on both sides, by the way, because there were a lot of fights, a lot of stories of the differences between his expectations and the way he was received and things like that. But so he moved in the 70s. Then he went back to Martinique, where he met my mother, and that's how it happened. That's how they had me. And he adopted Germany because he really loved the idea to be in Germany, and that's how he came to live in Germany for political reasons, basically.
All right, great. Now you live your life until around 11 in that city, and then you move closer to the Black Forest. Is that it?
Yes. Then I went to Freiburg, which is a city it's called Freiburg in Breisgau, and it's close to the German forest. And we had a house there, beautiful little house with a garden, a yard, and there was a huge yard in front of. It was surrounded by cherry trees, cherry blossom trees, and nuts, walnuts, and apple trees. It was sort of agricultural, but at the same time, it still was a big city. And I spent my time there. It was very interesting. My mother and my father gave me a very free education, so I was basically free to do whatever I want. They would never tell me to do my homework, and I still was doing it, but just by myself. I could go home whenever I wanted, even as a child. And it was interesting because I was often alone because other kids had to go home for lunch, they had to go home for dinner, when I could go home whenever I wanted. So most of the time I would end up being by myself. And as a result, I would spend a lot of time observing, playing with the trees and the animals and the insects around, and there was many of them. But moreover, I was able to bring them back home. So my room, and I was lucky because I had a big room, and my room was full of aquariums and cages where I would bring in trees and plants and snails and ants. And then with the years, as I was growing, I would bring animals that were more complex. So I would have frogs. I would catch frog eggs, and get them to hatch in my room. And it was, and I could do this because my mother herself had a big passion for animals, and I remember that when I was a baby, they saved a few animals. So I remember they saved an owl that hit the rear view of the car. One of the wings were damaged, and they saved it, and then we brought it to a center specialized in animal rescue in Germany. There are many of them. But I kept this habit of taking animals that were sick or hurt and then save them and then return them to nature. I would not, or I would take them, keep them for a while, but I would always release them, which was quite kind of interesting. And I would also have I had a huge table, a bit like this table, in the middle of my room that I asked my father to put in the room, and on that table I recreated an entire ecosystem. It was a huge table, but then I brought in rocks and branches and trees, and I just recreated an entire ecosystem, and there was sand and everything, and then I would play. That's where I would play with my Playmobil, basically. I would have, and I was really blessed, I think, to have that environment. Yeah.
All right. Can I ask you, do you have any idea why your parents let you do things very freely, like regarding hours when you had to come back home or homework, etc.? Is there a reason that you could?
I'm pretty sure it's their own background, because so my father was an orphan, and his mother died very early, so he was on his own from a very early age, and someone took charge of him but would not really take care of him. So he was doing everything by himself as a kid. And he that's why I think the army was great for him, because it was a way to liberate himself from this very oppressive background that he had when he was a child. But he was very free. Freedom meant a lot for him. And then my mother sort of had the same. She was not an orphan, but she's the older sister of 14 children. And so my mother became pregnant at the age of 18. She was very gifted for school, but for that reason, she had to leave school at a very early age. So what happened was that she was not educated in university or so, and as a result, she didn't really had the pressure to learn. However, she did have the passion to learn, but she wouldn't force me, and she didn't want to force me. She didn't want to force her children to do anything, because she was forced to do a lot of things because she had a child at a very early age. And one of the examples is religion, because my mother grew up in a very religious and very strict family. But of course, I mean Christian by definition, but she would never force us to become Christian. And I remember that all my cousins, and I have tens of them, and I have like more than 50 cousins, I think. And many of them were brought in with a religious background when I was not. And even my friends around me had to go to Catholic school, but I didn't. And she always told us, she explained to us why. The reason was that she didn't want to force a system upon us, and that we were the one to choose as we would grow up. And and that sort of background explains to me why they would not force me to do anything. And on top of that, she grew up in the Caribbean, in Martinique, where it's a warm place where people usually grow up outside the house, and people are really free compared to maybe a place that is not as warm, I guess. So all of these reasons together, I think, gave me a lot of freedom.
All right. And then it's great to hear that you seem to have made the most out of it. I definitely can relate to some of your story here. I've been, as far as I remember, pretty free as a kid as well, and lived until I was 14 in a very countryside environment with a lot of nature. So I think it has a lot of things that is beneficial to kids and to growing up. My story is very different in other areas, but compared to what I can witness being a teacher here and the amount of pressure, especially our school is very focused on academic achievement from early on.
How old are the kids?
It's Ikanko, so it's going all the way down to kindergarten and all the way up to high school.
Okay.
And for what sounds like very good reason, they're striving for academic performances, and that depending on how it's implemented, it can be very, and depending on the kid and the family environment, etc., it can work, and sometimes it doesn't really work, right? And it can really become painful for kids. So not having excess pressure there, but rather relying, when everything goes well, on inner motivation. I think that's awesome. And it also, I think, brings the most, let's say, accomplished kind of adults, as far as balanced as well, but also I think really people who don't need to be told what to do with their life, and they will look for that themselves and hopefully find an answer that makes sense to them.
Sure.
And I think when you're used to just do things because you're being told to do them, I'm not saying your life is not worth living. It's definitely has a lot of positive things in it, but it can be challenging to kind of get out of that mold of I'm doing this because that's what I have to do, and not because that's how I feel like I want to live, right?
I completely agree.
So from there and so just before we were working here from the station, and actually very randomly found out that we know some, we've been to the same university in Paris.
That's amazing.
It's a very, plus not only that, but when I was doing research in Japanese history, my main teacher, director of research in Paris, is actually a teacher you know personally and still have contact with, which I don't.
And I just happened to send her a message this week, and she, it's amazing.
It's amazing coincidence, but from Germany near the Black Forest, making ecosystems on a kind of meeting table, to Paris, how did that happen?
Wow, that's a very well. I have to say there's a lot of randomness in because I think luck always plays a role in your life. I think I was I feel very blessed to be here in Japan, but I'm not a scientist. I work in business and I really enjoy it. But I think that when I was a child, I had predispositions to become either a zoologist or a biologist, and it's just that it didn't happen for many reasons. But because I had this eye for animals and for nature that even my teachers didn't have in school, and I knew hundreds of names in Latin names of animals and fishes. My mother was breeding fish and small ornament fishes like guppies and platies, and I had maybe 200 or 300 of them, all of them born in my own aquarium. And I would breed them, I would take care of them, I would make sure that the babies wouldn't be eaten by their mothers. I had separate tanks for them to grow. But I was doing the same. I was catching salamanders, for example, and I was also breeding them, which is really hard to do, but I was doing it. And I had like larvae and stuff. And so I could see, even without a microscope, that what I had, and I could discern different species, and I try to share my passion with teachers, but they couldn't understand, because I remember that one day I brought larvae of a species of salamander that grows up in Germany, and the teacher saw it and said, "Oh, that's a mosquito," and I was like, "That's not a mosquito. That it's that species of salamander." Is like, "What are you talking about? That's a mosquito." And that was a biology teacher. And it's like, okay, but it has branches, and okay, it's a mosquito. You make some research and figure out it's a mosquito, okay? And I was like, okay. And he took the specimens that I brought and to study them in his class. And I remember that another kid who was in the class said, "Look, this is a salamander, and we are going to study." The teacher said that. And I was like, why did he say that then? And basically there was no reason. But it's just an example to say that, no, I didn't meet someone who would push me into going deeper into my research and doing more of it. And I ended up not doing it because, when I think about the environment that I was creating on my table, I think I had predispositions to do something related to nature. And now with my activism, I think that I'm connecting the dots finally, and I'm starting to connect again with nature, and I'm starting to think about projects that I can run to go back to my original passion with nature. But how did it? Coming back to the question. Well, so I went to high school in Germany, and then to France. I did my last years of high school in France, in Alsace. So I would take the bus every day from
Which city?
It's called Weissenburg. It's Wissembourg. It's a small town in Alsace. It's close to the German border. So my parents moved to this city called Landau, which is also a Roman city. It's a Roman name actually, Landau. And we would take the bus, the military bus, every single day to go to high school. And after that, I went to university in Strasbourg.
Okay.
And I decided to study Japanese. And the reason why I decided to study Japanese was that it was one of my dreams. I was really looking for what to do in my life. I had plans, but everybody was telling me that my plans were not realistic and that it would never happen. I wanted to study arts but everybody was discouraging me to do it. And when I say everybody, my family, teachers, and then I said, okay, I'm going to study Japanese. And I did 2 years of Japanese, and then I decided to go back to Martinique after 2 years to reconnect with my culture, because in Strasbourg, I met with the community, the Martinique community of French students who were coming from Martinique, and I became a member of their association. And then I really started to reconnect with my original culture, and I was looking for my origins at that time. And I decided to go back to Martinique, and I stayed for almost a year, and then realized that I didn't have a future on the island, even though I had ideas, but I didn't have the capital I didn't have the support that I need to do something on the island, even though it allowed me to understand the culture to a very, very high level. I could see things that I think even people living in the island can't see. I reconnected with the language as well, so I could, become fluent in speaking Creole again. And but I had to go back to France. I went back to Paris, and that's where I went. I went to Paris 7 and to the university, same as you, and that's where I went for my master's, basically.
All right. Just to go back to one or two things you said there. That's going back quite far, but
sure.
Regarding the not meeting anyone that really pushed you forward for biology, etc. I think, and some people might just have this point of view, or know people or famous people might just have build themselves up without that kind of external push.
Yeah,
but I think not having any role model that you can really because when you're not having in your environment people who show that it's possible to live in certain ways, it stays quite alien to you. Even if you have an idea,
absolutely,
it's way more natural for human beings, I would say, to, even if you're looking to go farther than your model, is to have some amount of model. And if the person you identify as being the specialist of biology in your environment is not really someone you can look up to, and you don't really have much deep respect for that person for whatever reason, you might just not really feel like wanting to go that
absolutely,
right? Yeah. So I think it's basically that is something that's fascinating to me. It's how the same person being brought up as a kid in a very different environment. I'm not talking about material, but more about human potential.
Sure.
Like if you're being raised in an environment where that there's a lot of like creativity and art, etc. You are more naturally gonna go towards those areas,
absolutely,
right? I thought for a long time I had no artistic fiber in my bones because my immediate family is not artistic, right? And I only a few years ago kind of stumbled upon some part of creativity, which was through photography for me. And I'm not doing it anymore, but really.
Yeah, you're doing it through body expression and dance. And
also as well. And all this started really late for me, like in my 30s, right? But if I have kids, for example, and I can share that with them, that's going to be something that's going to be more natural to them. So I think that what you expressed was probably a bit related to that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. You know, it's very much so. You know, I never had anyone guiding me or telling me, and I would think of maybe my father, and my father, I never had a single conversation with my father about me. He never talked to me about anything. I mean, that's related to my life. And I don't bear any grudge against that. Because he would take me to the park every weekend to feed boars and to feed, huge animals and bears. So I was blessed because he would take me to a park and I would feed bears that are 2 meters high, like huge bears. He would take me to those parks. He took me once to a park where there were lions and like tens of lions and no one else but us in the park. And buffaloes.
Where was that?
That was in Germany. He would take me to the buffaloes, and I was able to be with buffaloes and touch them, and no one else was there because no one really cared. I mean, Germany's huge, right? And but he would allow me to do things that were extraordinary, I mean, for a child. However, he didn't have, I think, the education that would allow him to guide me. And that's the way it is. But I didn't have that in school either, right?
Okay. Going back to a second thing.
Sure.
I should have written it down. Yes. Regarding, you just said something that was very interesting to me. Well, I mean, everything is very interesting, but this, I really related to it. It kind of, my brain clicked there. You said that going back to Martinique for almost a year, you were able to not only understand more your culture there that comes from that place, but maybe even understand it more than people who've been living there their whole life. And whether that's true or not, I mean, especially if you ask people who are living there, that's one thing. But it can be true in a way that there's some things you only understand when you've been out of that environment. Yeah. And it clicked very strongly because it reminds me of a Japanese intellectual from, if I'm not mistaken, is it end 17th or 18th, of the 18th century, Oyu Sorai, who said something like that. Mm-hmm. He was, like, everything was happening in Edo at the time, as far as he was concerned, and he got pushed out of the city for a while. I don't remember at all the reasons. And actually, afterwards, thinking about it, it allowed him to understand a lot of things from his own, like, take a step back and look at the world differently. And so there's a Japanese saying about that, I don't remember. But anyway, so I think that's something that's very valuable an experience. And same for me, living here definitely helps getting perspective.
Yeah, because people live in silos. People live in circles, and they usually don't get out. But if you're an outsider, you see all those different silos. And that's what happened to me in Martinique. And I saw people who didn't even speak French when it was unthinkable where in the family where I was not to be able to speak French. But I met people because I was looking for people like this. I saw I saw how segregated the island is, like the remnants of slavery that are still there present. And I saw, in the north of the island, you have a hospital for handicapped children, mentally handicapped children, and you have, these kids usually are born from the white families that used to dominate the island, because they used not to mix with other people. They didn't want to mix with other people, so they would have children between brothers and sisters and cousins, right? And so you had a hospital hidden in the woods for these kids, and I saw the kids of these whites who used to run the island and still own it, but I saw their kids, and their kids were always together. But I had the opportunity to meet them, and they only speak Creole, and they don't speak French, and things that no one on the island have the opportunity to see, but I saw it. And that's just an example, but you have the same examples throughout our entire life, because you moved to different places. You went to Paris, and then now in Japan, and you see different circles. And when you talk to people in those circles, they don't see anything else most of the time, right?
Yeah. So you're in Paris studying Japanese at Paris 7, and you're doing your master's as well. Can you give us a time frame there? What year? That was probably before me, right?
Yeah, that was I left in 99, where I applied to the JET program.
Okay.
And I received, I think, and with 5 other people from France, crossed the continents and came to Japan for the first time.
All right.
And so I graduated in 99, and then I moved to Yokohama, and I spent 2 years in Yokohama
as a JET coordinator.
Coordinator, yeah. I was also teaching in schools. I was doing a lot
of things. I have friends who've done that, so I've seen a bit how it works.
Yeah, it was really amazing. It was amazing. I was teaching in 3 different high schools, and I was doing administrative jobs, translations. But it was a revolution, because I've met so many different people in these schools, and teachers, and because I was young, I was just in my 20s, just started, early 20s. I was close to the students, so I could see one side of the students that the teachers couldn't see, and it was a great cultural shock for me, because it was so different. And I thought that Japan to me was like heaven, because people were so nice to me, and I had never seen anything like this. Everything was possible, and people were so nice. And all of a sudden, people had so many questions about me and my background, and they wanted to learn from me, like genuinely learn from me. And I had so many great experiences from there. But after 2 years, I thought it was unreal, and I was influenced by other people in the same program, and most of them were English, and English speaking, American English, Canadians, but it was like, the ratio was like 200 people for 200 English speaking people for one non-English speaker. And all of them, after 2 years, decided to leave the program and go back to their own countries. It's like, probably I should do the same, because I wasn't sure. And it looked too beautiful and too perfect after 2 years. So I decided to go back. And then I had my real culture shock coming back to France and living in France, which was really hard. It was tough, because it was not as open-minded. France is not as open-minded as Japan.
All right, elaborate on this, please.
Japan was, to me, was way more conservative in a sense that you can talk to people around. You can freely talk to people without scaring them. You know, in Japan,
Sorry, so you just said Japan is more conservative.
No, France
France?
is more.
Okay.
France is more conservative, and because of, I think the problem of security probably plays a role there. But let's say, I don't know, we're having a party, and I had this environment in Japan which was probably particular, but people were very friendly to each other and talking to each other all the time. But even in Yokohama, I would be able to. I had a lot of interactions with a lot of different people, and people would not judge you on your backgrounds, on your, they would not be suspicious of you trying to have a conversation with them. But when I came back to Paris, I didn't find that. People had to be suspicious because of insecurity. And I remember I was robbed on my first day when I came back to France by pickpockets, and they took, I think, I had a lot of cash on because I was going to the bank, and they took everything. and sometimes, I was trying to say, "Hey, where are you from?" and to people around me, I say, "Hey, where are you from? What's up?" And people would just dismiss me because, they didn't know me. And I think, and I know what you mean because, I think France is different and Europe is different. It's also very open in terms of diversity, and in terms of, you can also have build great relationships in France, but it's not easy. And I give you an example because I decided to learn Chinese when I was in France, and I got into the Chinese community, and I got into this little community of Asians, and I was the only non-Asian in that community. It was people from Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan, all together, all the time. And we would take a van and we would drive and we would go to parties together, we would have dinners together. But all of them had the same problem. They couldn't meet people from France. I was the only one they were able to connect with because most of them couldn't. And I remember I was helping a lot of them on administrations and stuff like that. And usually all the feedback they all had was that it was very difficult to become friends with someone from France. And in that sense, it's not as open because in Japan, it was very easy. Even if, Japan is different. I would say it's different because in Japan, you'll never be accepted as a foreigner in society. But everyone I know managed to become friends somehow with someone Japanese, or to have a Japanese girlfriend, whatever, or boyfriend, right? But you always manage to get like a relationship, sort of easily get a relationship. Whereas in France, in Paris, it used to be, for all the foreigners I knew, it was harder. And I give you another example. I was into an American community as well. And there was a lot of Americans and other nationalities, and they were doing foxtrot nights and jazz dancing nights all together. But again, most of them couldn't find French friends or friends in Paris. And then another example is I was doing capoeira, and I was into a Brazilian group. And again, I was the only French friend because they were not able to interact or to connect with people from France. So it's just my experience. I mean, it's not perfect science, but to me, I was aware that the hurdle to connect with people from the country is not low in Paris. It's pretty hard. But personally, I had an amazing life in Paris. I was working there and had many friends. But I was conscious that my community, it was not easy to get a community in France. And I had that community because I was working there, and I was working there for a while, and it used to work like a village, basically. Paris is like an amount of many villages where you have a group of friends and you stay within your group of friends, but it's not as open as to you talk to strangers, right? That's what I meant.
All right, it's a very interesting experience that you're relating here, and I understand more what you were meaning by Japan being more.
I know
open
it's dangerous
there.
ground. It's
Well, dangerous. I wouldn't say so. I mean, for most foreigners will have experienced indeed this how easy it is to meet people here and get very good vibes from.
Yeah,
a lot
and by
of
the way, I
people
don't
here.
mean Japanese people only.
Yeah,
I mean, here, it's that easy to meet non-Japanese people, right?
It is very easy to meet a lot of people. I mean, you still have to make the first move most of the time, but not always. Like sometimes you're just being a foreigner, especially if you're kind of program like exchange program or whatever, or you're at work. As long as you're the minority, but one of the minority that's usually viewed in a positive light. Right. So,
Yeah.
which is most foreigners here, but not all. Like I know that if
No,
you're, for example, a Korean or Chinese, it's not the same experience as if you're like European, right? Or from the West. But it's true that you will easily get a lot of people, Japanese people most of the time, but foreigners as well, like interested in you. And when it's Japanese people, to my experience, after a few years, you get a lot of friends who go like, yeah, but they're just interested in you because you're a foreigner, right? But you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you can develop a true relationship.
Absolutely, that's a good point.
But I would argue that developing the true relationships that, at least for me and for quite a few people I talk with about this issue, with Japanese people is way harder. Because of the cultural gap and other things.
Yeah,
so you get more of a certain kind of, to put a word on it, and not especially a negative one, but it's a bit like a lot of superficial or at least not that deep relationships. And then to get really the most meaningful, most deep, like where you share the most relationships, having those might be harder abroad in general. In Japan, for Western people, definitely. And for me, I've lived in several places in France and in Belgium. I've lived in Brussels quite a few years as well. Definitely having being part of the mainstream culture of the place where you're living, and helps meet more people with whom you're going to be able to connect further.
Sure.
So it's more challenging here, might be even more rewarding in a way.
Yeah.
But I find that, as for me, for the past few years, I've been having a more balanced social and emotional life, opening myself to more friendship with non-Japanese people, whereas the first few years I was really 100%. But when I say 100%, like people don't really know maybe, but like through my research, through my hobbies at the time, they were all based in Japanese traditional culture. It was like so much Japanese stuff that maybe I was not having that one or a few very relationships where I can really relate to. So that was kind of lacking in my life at that point. But I see what you were
but I'll give you another example. And I think that in Japan, people definitely do judge you. I mean, it's one of the most, I think it can be one of the most oppressive, culture in the world in terms of conformity. But at the same time, I mean, you can go to a Vuitton shop in Japan, dressed however you dress, people won't even look at you and they won't judge you. You could go to the Prada shop and, people won't really judge you and whoever you are. And people dress sometimes here in certain ways, even if it's such a society of conformity, but still, you're free to be dressed in a certain way. If you're a rapper, you're going to dress as a rapper. People won't judge you because you're dressed as a rapper. If you're a punk or if you're, people they would judge you maybe, but they won't offend you, or, they won't sort of. I didn't have the same experience in Paris, also because, and I was working in fashion.
Okay.
So I was aware, but in fashion, but maybe because of insecurity has to play in it. But I saw way more discrimination in Paris.
Okay.
Way more violent discrimination that I saw in Japan.
Yeah, I have a few ideas of why that.
There is discrimination in Japan. There is discrimination.
It's more hidden, though.
It's more hidden.
Yeah.
But there is hidden discrimination in France.
That's true.
However, there is also rampant, open discrimination that I saw, even experienced, but I saw it in France. And it was pretty shocking to see people insulting this way or spitting. And I have many examples, but they're very powerful examples, but, this environment doesn't exist here, right?
I think what we can see as one of the reasons why you can experience in France more such behaviors is that because there's less social pressure to conform to a certain baseline of civility, let's say, that you are you're freer to let your basic instincts more loose and be rude or something like that, because it's more. That's a good point. I've never had that perspective. So if to be a quote unquote good citizen, good guy, like civil person in France takes more personal drive, personal work. You have to want it more. Here, you just have to follow the rules of society as you've always been told to do, because that's the main culture. And so there's less individuality, which when people tell me as tourists here, oh, it's so convenient, it's so clean, it's so etc., but you don't see why that's the case, right? And there's a lot of good things there, but I also see the less shining parts of it.
I think that's one side of it, because we also have history playing, and
definitely.
France, most of the sort of violence I saw was
racial.
And it was not, ethnic. I don't know if ethnic French means anything, but it was not like immigrants against French. It was more like a lot of times immigrants against immigrants, Jews abused by young Arabs, for example. I saw that. That was really shocking. I saw a lot of that. Or an black African abused by a young North African abusing an old black African, and with insults, very strong words, right? Or a group of Chinese manifesting, insulted by. I think that one. That was a great one, because I was in the bus and there were two old traditional Parisians and old and with a kid, and they were telling the kid how disgusting those Chinese were, and they were telling look, in their countries they can't do this, so they can't protest. So these dirty Chinese are coming to you're our beautiful country to do it, but we should send them back. And I said, I had to say something. And I said, look, you can't say that. I mean, don't forget, 50 years ago, France was liberated from the Nazis, by people from many different nationalities, including the Americans. But you can't say that, right, to a kid and influence him in the wrong way, right? That one, I said something, right? But I mean, it's just an example. We don't have that. I mean, a country, Japan is more like a dreamland compared to, in terms of social and, you know, ethnic tensions and everything that we have in Europe, and there is much more brutality, which explains, I think, that people have to be more suspicious.
I know, that's true.
Right? And
I can see where that comes from, and it's definitely a very interesting point of view hearing that from you. So you're in Paris and working in fashion. How so?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was hard to find a job in France. I mean, no one really needed someone who spoke Japanese.
Oh, no, definitely. It's not the way you want to go if you want to make money.
No, and so I had a hard time until, I mean, I really wanted to use that skill.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do any other job, right? I really wanted to leverage my skill. So my first job, I found a job working with a Japanese, very small company, exporting pharmaceutical goods and cosmetics to Japan. So we would buy to different pharmacies, and I would do everything. So I would be the buyer, I would work on the shipments, and I would ship it over, I would translate. It was hard and not paid well, but allowed me to speak Japanese in Paris and be with and I met great friends there, and they're still my friends, but then it was not paid enough, and I found that opportunity to work for a jewelry company exporting, and they need someone to run their Asian business. I ended up running Asia, Germany, Spain, and random countries. But I managed to find that job where Japanese was highly needed, and I was doing all the transactions, and that's what connected me to Japan. But it was fashion, basically.
I see. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, sorry.
I was curious because you studied Japanese and then some Chinese at some point as well, and so you work related like in businesses, but so all the business part of your job, you basically and your skills you develop them like doing the job, basically. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I also studied. I mean, I went to the French Center for National Arts, and I studied finance and business there,
okay.
Right? But it was more, I was more like a self-made man studying, by myself, but that I thought I have a strong intuition for business, and that's always what I wanted to do, and I'm also very entrepreneurial. But fashion, I never thought I would work in fashion ever. And all of a sudden, I was working for a jewelry company, and I was selling to Japanese and Korean and Chinese companies, and working with women. I was surrounded by females. It was so different. The experience was very, very different for me, and I had to adapt to change the way I was working because it was such a different culture. It was changing all the time, and it was very feminine. I remember my boss she was a woman. I mean, she was a very strong woman, very strong woman. I wouldn't say masculine, but she had a lot of the the masculine attributes in her. And she was running the boat with a very hard hand. And she surrounded herself with other strong women. And that was the environment that I was working in Paris. And because it was fashion, I had to adapt. And at some stage, I started losing a little bit. And, that's where I had my first big afro in my life. So I had a huge afro, afro. That was amazing. And braids. But I had at some stage, I managed to adapt a very free sort of style as well. And that's the influence of basically fashion.
All right. And so from there, you came back to Japan like 12 years ago, you told me?
Yeah, I think I had enough in France. And I really wanted to go back to my first love. And I missed, it's not about, I think it's freedom. You have more freedom here. Maybe as a foreigner. Maybe as a foreigner. Yeah, definitely as a foreigner, probably. Because here, you're never integrated in society. You're always sort of floating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're floating. And it's not, you never belong here. I mean, I think in Paris, if you stay for a while in Paris, you ended up belonging to Paris. And you can claim, this is my home, right? And the same thing for New York, Brooklyn, whatever. I mean, if you've been, wherever you're from, if you go to New York, after a while, you would claim that you're from New York. And it's your city, and you're proud of your city. I think it's hard as a foreigner to claim belonging to here and say, I belong, this is my place, because you're never accepted. Each and every single day you will have an experience that will remind you that you don't belong here. Whether it is the guy that's gonna not sit next to you in the train, or when you go to buy something and they will not know how to talk to you because you look different, and they will use English, and they will tell you how amazing your Japanese is, but there will always be something every day, or maybe the police that will stop you and ask you for your ID card because you're a foreigner. So there will always be something that will remind you that you can't be always, you can't believe in being from here. And I that's maybe my experience, but I don't, I think it's very unique. But as a result, you're also always sort of floating and always, I think I'm very creative. And because I think this place is an amazing place for creativity, to develop your creativity. Also, it's an amazing place to reveal your true self. Because it allows you to to reflect a lot about who you truly are and go back to your source. And that's what happened to me in Japan.
Yeah, it totally makes sense to me. I really agree with your experience there of not feeling like you belong to this place. And that's coming from people like, as far as we have something in common, study related, we both studied the language and the culture. So we started here in Japan with way more knowledge, at least in theory, of the country than a lot of foreigners. And it's not to feel superior or whatever, right?
No,
on the other hand, like you said, it's not Japanese studies that's going to get you a job easily. So those who come with other skills are usually better off. But for the cultural aspect of things, even if you understand in your head a lot of things, right, it's not going to make you feel like you belong to that, right? And that can be a drive pushing people to leave the island at some point, because it's, as you said, it might be very stimulating for creativity and a lot of things, and to reflect on yourself. And I really agree about that, because there's more reflection that I can take sometimes in my own life. But it's definitely not comfortable.
No.
Compared to other places where everything is normal.
You said it. It's not, you can't be comfortable here. People look at you in a different way. Like you're the alien in a sense, right?
Sure.
But so and I think that's an amazing, accepting this or not accepting it is what makes it or breaks it.
Oh, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And that challenge, I think, accepting to be discriminated on a daily basis is one of the biggest challenges one can ever take.
And let's be clear here, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a comfortable discrimination,
exactly, right?
This place, I mean, it's super nice on.
By the way, yeah, no.
We're not talking discrimination like crazy things like where there's violence. Economic.
No.
Here, sometimes it's very uncomfortable, like when it's related to people who don't want you to live in one of their apartments because you're foreigners. That kind of stuff sometimes happens.
Yeah.
But most of the time, you just feel like you don't belong. You feel different, and it's being reminded to you, sometimes nicely, sometimes not nicely, but it's nothing life-threatening.
Yeah,
right?
This is one of the easiest place for a foreigner to be living in without being in danger, basically. And so there might be a certain level of discrimination here, but we're not talking about violence. And God, there are many examples of countries, and go to neighboring. I've got examples in China, in Korea, or India, or Russia, where there's a lot of violence sometimes. Physical violence, and because of of racism, basically. But I mean, here you do have a certain degree of racism, but never to a point that it's life-threatening. It's kind of funny in a way.
Yeah, when you're a Westerner and I can't really talk for like people who are coming from Korea or China, or like who are like Nikkei, they come back from the South America, right? They're supposed to be part of the culture, or at least the Asian quote unquote culture, but they're not really. So they're kind of in between two things there. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I try to embrace a lot of things Japanese, even at that time, until a few years ago, I wasn't trying to be Japanese, right? I just enjoyed everything I was doing. Yeah. So that's why I was doing it, but I wasn't like trying to be Japanese. And I didn't feel like Japanese or whatever, right? So it's a very, you can take it with a bit of perspective and make fun of it, because you're in a very, let's say, you have a lot of privileges as a foreigner living here. Yeah. No, you do. But I think some of the privileges that we have are privileges that everybody enjoys in the country, and this is basic security. I mean, true.
And when you don't have to worry about your own safety or being robbed or being stolen something, you move on and think about something else. You never have to worry about your train being late. You can buy groceries and whatever every single day. Your basic needs are satisfied, and so you end up thinking about something else in security. It doesn't use a lot of your processing power in security. Then you use that processing power for something else. And that comes to, I don't know, whether it is becoming creative.
True. I can definitely see how that would work for quite a few people I know. On the other hand, one might argue that the way the Japanese society is structured and the expectations related to work in most Japanese companies for Japanese people kind of way more than counterbalancing the negative side Every advantages you get from not worrying about security, like with the amount of work you have, or the long hours,
Yes.
or the conformity,
I agree with
it
that.
doesn't connect
Yeah.
to more creativity, I think, or
Not necessarily,
more less stressful lives, let's say.
Yeah,
Like
no,
they're
it
very
doesn't.
stressed here, right?
Yes, I've experienced it in different companies that I worked for, and I completely agree with you. And I don't think it's natural. I think this is more related to the fact that we live in a big city,
Yeah.
right? It's there's always a trade-off, I guess, and I think in a big city like Tokyo, it's easy to lose, and a lot of people lose the social ties they had with their families, and most people from the professional population working in Japan is not from Tokyo. And I know people who are traditionally from Tokyo, and they've been living in the same house for 5 generations, and these people do not have the stress level that other people have.
Interesting.
And they work in a very traditional way. They celebrate all the different Japanese traditions. They bring in a lot of people, and I was blessed to be one of them. But as long as the social structure is still very present, I don't think that the same stress level exists.
It's a very, I think, powerful message there. And let's just go towards that area then. Speaking of social ties,
Sure.
You're father of a family here, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Can I ask you, is your wife Japanese?
Yes, she is. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, she's Japanese, and she doesn't speak foreign languages.
Oh, right.
She doesn't speak English, so she's not sort of cosmopolitan. She's very traditionally sort of ingrained into. She's from the north of Japan, from Niigata. Niigata,
that's
right?
Cool. Beautiful place.
And she, beautiful place. I mean, snowland.
Yeah.
Very quiet place. That's also where my son was born. Same city as my wife and her mother. And it's I have a son 7 and a daughter who's 5.
Okay, nice.
And they are growing between 2 very different cultural sort of poles. Right?
I can imagine. And so I'm going this direction.
Sure.
Because I think a very important thing, as you said, for stress level and how satisfied you're with where you are in your life is the quality of your social relationships, and especially if you're having a family, and how much meaning that brings to your life, right? And
very good point.
And I'm single. I have no family ties here. I've been here a long time, and for a lot of people who spend like more than 5, 6, 7 years in the country, and especially if they can speak the language, usually you will find them in some kind of maybe married or something like that. Personally, it didn't happen, but I definitely acknowledge the fact that not the fact that not being married, but I mean not having such ties definitely makes me even more floating than you might feel, right? So I'm more it makes me more potentially mobile. I can go places, right? I have a lot of friends here because of all my social activities.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, but for one, maybe friendship or 2, those are not super deep ties.
Right.
So although I would be sad to leave them behind,
sure,
it's not like the one relationship that you're leaving behind that's really going to break your heart. And I would have a more fulfilling. I would be feeling more fulfilled if I had, I think, more quality as far as like deeper relationships, I think, which, as I explained, is harder here
Sure.
maybe than other places in the world for me.
Oh, definitely.
And so I think, and listening to you talk about it, having a more than not a happy family life definitely changes the color. It's like a slider, you know, on the picture. You can be more colorful or less colorful.
Yeah.
I think having that meaningful social ties, whether it's family or something else that has a lot of meaning to you, definitely makes everything more colorful.
That's a very good point. That's a very good perspective. I think, I mean, my life truly changed when I had my first child, and not that because I didn't plan strategically on being married, and it sort of happened to me, right? Okay. I didn't say, okay, a year from now I'm going to be married, and I had my girlfriend, and we just ended up being married and having a kid, but I was not really planning like a life plan. Because I was living the Japanese life of a foreigner who's not married and who's floating, in a sense, right? And it was pretty wild. My life in Japan was pretty wild in the sense that I had no ties, nothing, no sort of center of focus, except for my job.
Not really any roots.
No rules, right? Roots. And roots, and also in a sense rules, because I could wake up whenever I wanted, anytime I wanted, every single day, and no one would be telling me what to do. And I was doing it for myself. Whereas now, it's very different, as I'm doing it for my family. And it gave me, but it opened a completely different world to me, because now I had to socialize with other people who have kids like I do, and that was a crazy transition. It was a hard transition, actually. I think it is for most parents or most fathers, people who become fathers. And I think it is a huge change where you can't just be like you used to be. You have to go according to to somebody else's agenda. And here, my kids, I have to organize myself around their lives, right?
True. And now we've been talking for quite a while, and this is supposed to be centered around at least some amount of plant-based related stuff. So maybe the audience got bored and stuff, but I don't think so. I'm really fascinated by hearing all your life story experiences. But when and how did you start to think about everything diet related and then animal related, or maybe one before the other?
Well, I mean, I became vegan about 3 years ago, right? And the thing is, I never thought about it. I never thought about it as, okay, I care for the animals, and I want to make a change, but it's hard. But when I think about it now, I tried many times. I was naturally inclined to a plant-based diet. I never had the reflection, though, to adopt one. And the way I moved to plant-based was very sudden and brutal in a way. It was not. It wasn't to me a sound, sort of rational decision. I just make the switch just like that. And it was more, I think, I had an experience. An experience made me change. And it was a bit like a revelation. And I remember I was walking by the park. I was with my wife, and for some reason, all of a sudden, I felt that I was listening to animals suffering. It was very strange. And I had this emotional outbreak, as in when when you want to cry because when you're really sad, and in your brain you really feel sad and you want to cry. And for 1 second, I had that in my head, and thinking about the animals. And then I knew I would not eat meat ever again. I would not touch anything that's animal ever again. That's how basically it happened to me. When I think about it now, I think there was definitely influences of my past, of the way I see animals during my entire life, including my childhood. But it happened after I went deeper into meditation. Interestingly, when I think about it and I look back, I always practiced meditation with ups and downs, but I started to practice meditation when I was 15. I discovered some Buddhist monk, a book that was offered to me by a friend of mine, a mother who read it and said, maybe I should read it. And there were some meditations in it. And there were some meditations. I think there was a bit of magic in this book because it was meditations, and there was also stuff about out-of-body experiences and astral voyages, and which I never managed to do, by the way. But I really tried. And I ended up doing meditations for hours when I was a teen. I was doing 8 hours of meditation sometimes in a row, conscious meditations, and with amazing results, by the way. But it is only 4 years ago, I was really stressed by work, and there was a lot of pressure. And I had to find a solution. I had stress at home too, a lot of stress at home. I didn't know how to handle my family and my wife, and it was tough. And and that's when I encountered meditation again. I started to do a little bit of mindfulness, and it reminded me that I used to do it here and then. So I started to do it again at work, but then I went more serious into it, and I started to practice every day, religiously. I would go to, I don't know if you know the Meiji Shrine, Meiji Temple. I would go there. There's a huge and beautiful park, and no one goes there in the morning. It's open at 5 a.m., 6 when it's during winter, but 5 a.m. during summer. So I would go there and practice meditation. At first, I would do maybe 30 minutes, and then I would move to 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours. But I would meditate with my eyes wide open, and I would practice Zen meditation. I would also go to a Zen temple. I still go there sometimes. Beautiful temple with beautiful wooden statues, and it's in Tokyo, but it's an amazing place where you meditate in a very traditional meditation room where the monks are sleeping. And so I would meditate in the park, sitting under a tree, always the same tree, every single day. And I would sit there and eyes wide open, look in front of me. And believe it or not, I would see the same insects every day. Because it was their neighborhood, basically. So you had a couple of dragonflies and a praying mantis, I don't know. But you would come back the next day and you would I was doing this for a month. And you would recognize, look, this is... But I would stand still all the time without moving for 1 hour. Really focusing on my breathing, eyes wide open. I would look at the grass and everything would look different. The more I was doing it, my relationship with my environment and the earth and Mother Nature was becoming different each and every time. And I had those breakthroughs sometimes, breakthroughs where the difference between me and my environment with the trees surrounding me disappeared, basically, vanished. And I remember clearly those moments. And, I had the beautiful moments, by the way. So sometimes I would just sit in a meditation position, and a dragonfly would just stand on my lap, staring at me. And because the dragonfly would stay still without moving, I didn't want it to fly. I didn't want to disturb it. But it was standing on me, basically, or on my hands. And I would focus even more in order not to move and stand still. And then another one would come on the other side. Beautiful dragonflies, by the way, blue or red colors. And they would only leave if someone else, like a group of people, would come and pass by me. But at first, when I started, anytime I would feel something on my head, I would slap on my head because I thought maybe that's a mosquito or that's a fly, and I would be, would be disturbed, and I didn't accept it. And then, or that's a bee or a huge wasp coming next to me, and that's going to bite me, so I would move my head in all directions, my hands in all directions, and then I started to not do this. And there would be a big, big wasp coming, flying just around my ears with the big noise, like zzz. And at first, I remember at the beginning I was scared, but then I would let it go, and they would do nothing to me, right? They would just fly around, and they would stay on my head, but they wouldn't bite me. Maybe they would have, I don't know, but they didn't, right? And I started to accept it. I started to accept all the insects and the flies and everything. And I'm pretty sure that those breakthroughs that I had an influence on me having this experience and becoming vegan. So it was not a rational decision, but it definitely happened after me doing months of meditation and putting things back into place in my own head. Reconnecting with my breathing, with my body, with my thoughts, and understanding that there is no difference between me and other sentient beings and other people. I genuinely was able to accept everything around me. Everything became better. The relationship I had with my kids, I didn't have a problem with my kids, but with my wife, the misunderstanding I had because of the cultural differences and everything. At work, all the pressure, I was able to absorb it and accept people's frustration and people's stress, because originally I'm very weak to other people's stress. I absorb it and I sort of not victimize myself, but I take it on me. And as a result, it damages me. But then I was able to absorb it and it wouldn't hurt me anymore. Because when you meditate, the question you ask yourself is who you are. Who am I? And then you realize, meditation is just one of the ways to realize that as people, who we are is a construction. We don't have a center of decision inside of ourselves. There is no center of decisions. There's not one center that defines who you are. You just build it by yourself. And we call this ego. But when you do meditation, first of all, you understand what ego is. I mean, it takes years probably to do that, but it can take years to do that. But you understand, first of all, that what ego is. It doesn't mean you transcend ego, because transcending ego means you're enlightened, basically. But you understand what ego is because you see it for what it is. You see what ego does to you. And then you see what it does to other people. without them being aware. Because if you do meditation, you start becoming aware. But most people aren't doing meditation and they're not aware of their ego, basically. But you understand that people's decisions are not necessarily, even the worst decisions and even the worst thing they could ever say is not something they intend to say. It's part of them that is saying it. And it's not them. The same way that you is a notion that is a construction, them is also a construction. You realize it's a projection that you have on other people. And I started to take responsibility in a way for my emotions, my thoughts. I wouldn't get anybody else but me to carry responsibilities of my thoughts and my emotions. And so I accepted people because I developed a lot of compassion to people. And in the same way, I developed compassion to, I realize a lot of the things, in the same way that, look, meditation allowed me to realize that what I thought I was not who I really was. And I freaked out because at some stage, during my meditative process, I realized that I didn't exist. As in, the ego that I had was not really me. So for a while, I had this breakthrough that, I don't exist. So what am I? I freaked out. I was like, so who am I? I'm nothing. I'm nothing. So, but most people around me don't know that. And it influenced all the conversation I was having with people. Because I was having those conversations with people and they were talking about things and it was like, man, you don't know. You don't know you don't even know who you are. And you're talking to me like that, but you don't even know who you are. But I became compassionate because it also applied to all the stressful conversations that people had where they were stressed and it also applied to my relationship with, I destroyed all the pre-constructed notions that we have. One of them being that animals are food. I realized that animals are not food. It was not a conscious process. It was not a rational process. It was part of my meditative process to realize that animals, there is a big contradiction in loving animals and what we do to them. It was just pure craziness. And I look at the past because, I'm a child of, I have direct roots with slavery. And part of my life, I really, I really dived into the history of slavery and my ancestors. And I discovered many interesting things, but it was part of my life to look at this oppression that my ancestors lived. And it also shocked me when I was a kid to learn, about lynching people. And, when I was in Martinique, you had those trees that are really famous because they are the trees where you used to hang slaves that were fleeing. And there's a legend in Martinique that you should never cut one of those trees or it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life, which is why people from the country wouldn't cut the trees. But people from the outside didn't give a shit. They would just go and just cut it just to exploit the ground, so that, in a sense, Martinique changed a lot not because of people on the island, but because of people outside of the island. But just to tell you that I realized that back in the days, people who were living in the time of slavery thought it was normal to have slaves. My family had slaves, actually. My own family, I made some research and I spoke with my family. Part of my family is wealthy in Martinique, they're very wealthy. And they have plantations and but they still had people on those plantations that didn't get a salary, just lived there and worked It was normal. And I learned that in the past, my family had slaves, like maybe 100, 150 years ago, they had slaves. They were mulattoes. But by then, it was normal to have slaves. And when a bunch of people said, here and there in France, in America, that was not normal to treat people like animals and to make them reproduce themselves to get the best slaves and to whip them and kill them as you wish, was not normal. Some people, most of the population would freak out and say, what do you mean it's not normal? I mean, what else do we do to these people? They're not humans, they're animals, right? But I can understand this because this is where we are now. Like the way we treat people, we treat animals, and sometimes people, is the same that we used to treat people like slaves, for example, a long time ago. Because it was the norm, it was a social norm. And now what is accepted as killing animals and treating them like shit and slaughtering them to eat their flesh, is normal, as it was normal to own slaves back in the days and being able to rape and to separate children from their mothers, to sell them, to make some earnings, right? And I sort of realized that. But, it was not a rational process where I thought, okay, so because of that, I should stop eating meat. No, I would continue to do it, but I knew back in my subconscious mind that it was not normal. But I have to tell you another thing. I started to look at a lot of videos of slaughterhouses. A bit like what you see in the movie Dominion, which I can't even dare to watch Dominion now. I was in a vegan festival in Bali last year, and one of the final events was the production of the movie Dominion, and I just couldn't watch it. However, before I became vegan, I was definitely looking at a lot of those videos, especially dogs in China, and in other countries, and dogs and pigs, but I saw a lot of them because it's like, okay, so I was in this meditative process where I needed to face everything because I needed to understand how I would react to anything. And I started to look at those videos, to look and observe my reactions in front of pain, in front of somebody. Because in China, you know that in China, there is a myth. I mean, some people might disagree with that, but it's definitely a myth that when you eat to get the best meat, you have to make the animal suffer a little bit so that it will release, endorphins, and it will make the stress level will make the animal taste better, or make the meat harder, or I don't know. And if you want your meat to be in a certain way, so that's part of it. Also in China, people don't see animal pain as somewhere else. I mean, I'm not talking, by the way, about the Chinese people, because a lot of people love animals in China. But it is true that you have some people who don't care, and people who kill animals. And dogs, for example, is an example where you see a German Shepherd being cut his feet before even being killed, right? Things like that. I watched a lot of videos like that where they would treat animals like they would treat wood, basically. The way they carry it and throw it and to kill it, and it was like these were not animated objects. It was like no care at all. And I watched hours of these. And I'm pretty sure this played in my subconscious. And that's where the voices that I heard, because you hear the voices of the animals crying for help. And I think to that extent, I was watching a lot of videos on dogs and how people kill animals, because I was like, okay, if it's okay to eat and kill animals, then it should be something that we should be able to watch, no problem. But why don't we watch it then? Because it's not okay. It's not normal. If it was normal, it would be easy to watch it. But it's not designed to be this way, so it's not normal. So when you watch it, and everyone that's non-vegan, which is why on my Facebook page, people complain to me and say, look, I need to unfriend you. I need to unfriend you because what you're showing here is horrible and you should never have shown this. This is like, I have to report you and I have to unfriend you. I agree with that, but the same person who is telling me that is someone that is strongly against veganism, basically. I mean, doesn't think that veganism is all right. Because they eat traditionally in their family, they eat a lot of animals, right? But they also love animals at the same time. But it's not okay to show how we kill them. Something is wrong there. And I had that work. I worked on myself with meditation so that I could observe what is wrong, as not that I know everything that is wrong and not wrong, but at least I could discern that. I could see that it was not normal. And I think that watching those videos and doing this meditative process definitely worked on my sudden change. And I didn't have to think, I didn't have to try. I never tried. It was not an effort for me. It just happened. I don't want to talk too much, so, you know.
No, it's great. It's fascinating to hear you tell your story and building meaning there between different parts of your life and different experiences, different areas of your life. There's way too much things that I'd love to talk about in more depth here, but just very quickly. So regarding meditation, I am very interested in the practice. I haven't meditated more than a very few times and never really found anything that makes me stick to it. I have a very meditative-ish mindset a lot of the time, I think. Obviously, I have only my own experience, but I self-reflect a lot. So I think I think I have some, and I do like when I run or when so I think I have some benefits, but I definitely never ever experienced this kind of dissolving of the ego thing, right? And this is attractive. It's appealing to me. I'd really love to go towards that kind of experience and for some of the benefits, the insights you get out of it. And I think what you said about waking up to animal suffering and going towards veganism that way, being an emotional process for you, I actually think that's the norm. I think that true facts, watching videos, reading books, having conversations, intellectual understanding of the problem definitely pushes people, makes people go towards a plant-based lifestyle at some point in their life. But the breakthrough, the one that makes it actually so obvious that it's not a choice, it's not a challenge. Yeah. It is difficult at times, socially and in some ways, but it's not like you're not struggling with your own cravings, your own self, let's say, to stick to the diet. It's actually going, you would have to make a conscious effort to eat meat. It would be very violent towards yourself. Yeah. You would feel a lot of pain. You would be like in distress emotionally doing that. Yeah. To get to that kind of state of mind, state of like heart, involves going through some kind of emotional experience.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you describe is beautiful, as in, I mean, sure, people might laugh at it, like you hearing voices or whatever. I listened to you and I heard someone who expressed kind of a reconnection between, you know, there's a gap between what we feel and what we understand, and this cognitive dissonance. A lot of people don't make the bridge between those two areas of their life, and I think it's a spectrum there, but they don't make it. They don't fill in the gap enough that it's so obvious for that person to after filling that gap not to eat animal products or to use animal products anymore.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
once you get there, it's very powerful. Like the experience itself. And I've talked to a few vegan friends, some of them vegan for a long, long time, like almost 20 years, others less so. And I haven't asked that question to everyone, so it's yet work in progress. But I think I would be surprised that any of them didn't experience their own version of what you described. For me, I did. I had a choice of doing some spear fishing. I didn't feel like crying at all when I kind of got this breakthrough. But I was doing snorkeling in Izu for a weekend, and it was with a group, and some of the people in the group were going for spearfishing, and I had been interested in, like you did with the videos, I thought like I want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to kill my own animals, not from there on, and that's the only thing I'm going to eat. But if I eat meat, I want to be comfortable to some extent with killing my own food there. And I said like to myself, well, I had looked up going to hunt in Hokkaido and that kind of thing, but that's far, etc. And I wasn't committed to that extent yet. So I was like, fishing, why not? Spear fishing, why not? I have this opportunity. And then I was snorkeling and I saw those fishes, and I was like, my question, the main question in my life, I think the question I love the most is why, usually. And why brings the question of choices, right? And although I don't really believe in free choice, depending on how you define free choice, there I definitely felt like I had the choice of letting this, like not intervening and having this fish live its life, or killing it, right? And I had no spear in my hand. I hadn't gone to that length, so it might not be that impressive. But in my mind, I vividly remember I had an emotional reaction there that was built upon a bit more than a year of questioning my diet choices. I had been through ethical meat researches and like that. I was buying only like game meat and stuff like that. So I was wanting to find an answer that was convincing to me. And I think I found it at that time. And so I think from there, if you build then intellectual knowledge regarding the problem, it's not only does it reinforces it does reinforce your values there, but it allows you to advocate better there. So I can relate to some extent to your experience, but the meditation part, that was unexpected. I loved it. It's great.
You know, that's very interesting. You know, I think we get a lot of sort of opportunities to be influenced becoming vegans. And I tell you one of them. I mean, I tell you interesting examples. You remember Walking Dead? You know, Walking Dead, the show. And a lot of people of the Walking Dead team became vegan.
Oh, because of the zombie thing?
Yeah. And if you look at all the movies that we love, like all the Pixar movies that we love, most of them are based on animals.
Oh, yeah, true. Well, it reminds me of Okja. I haven't seen the movie yet.
Yeah.
If you see what movie it is,
Yeah,
the Korean movie.
yeah.
I have a friend who I had two reactions recently. Like one friend who said she watched it. She was already vegan. She watched it, but she cried, and she was very like emotionally moved by that, and so she wanted to share those feelings with me. Not having a lot of vegan friends that would understand that around her, and another one who a totally different person and not the same thread. Like it was text based, but who said something like, "Yeah, I would have been moved if the animal didn't look like an unreal thing." So it's interesting to see different people react differently.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why, for example, a lot of people can relate to animals, but they still can't relate to fish. Yeah. Because fishes are different. They don't, close their eyes.
Yeah, and they look too different.
They look too different. And
same with insects.
And insects. And so a lot of people don't relate to them. And like in Japan, I was telling a friend yesterday that in Japan, a lot of people think that fish and vegetable is the same thing.
Yeah.
So I completely relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's those like they can lead towards a bit difficult questions about the living, right? And what does it mean to be alive and living in a world where there's no way to have a zero footprint on your environment, right? It's like insects. I don't want to kill insects, but you're walking on some dirt, you're killing some insects, right?
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? If you go crazy, and I say crazy here because I mean by that non-sustainable from an emotional point of view. If you are too much driven to be as harmless as possible, it's gonna like impact your life in very negative ways, right? Yeah. So you have to make some compromises between your ideals like both emotionally, from an intellectual point of view, what you understand to be more likely to be true. For example, it's most likely to be true that plants do not suffer. But even if they would be suffering, then you can have conclusions from there, like it makes more sense to eat them directly than the animals that eat them, etc. About like feeling a connection with the living being that you're actually putting in your mouth, it's definitely true that people feel less connection with the fish. But anecdote here, the other week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was in Yogi Park for my weekly acro thing, and there's a lot of people walking in the park, right, and dogs, etc. And a pig, that dude was walking his pig, and I was like,
how big was the pig?
It's a pretty big pig, like this.
And because miniature pigs are it's just not true. Okay. It doesn't exist.
Okay. And it was an oldish guy, a Japanese guy. And at first my first question in my mind was like, dude, are you vegan? That was my, because I'm like, I'm like wearing vegan apparel or whatever. And I was like, I'm curious, but I was like, I don't want to be obnoxious. I'm not going to stop him. But then he got stopped for pictures because obviously a pig, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask. And so I'm going there, but I don't ask right away. I said, oh, by the way, why a pig?
Yeah.
He says like, well, I think it was his children, got it from a pet shop a while ago, and I ended up being the one taking care of it.
That's a funny story.
So I'm like, oh, okay. And by the way, just curious, but do you still eat pork? And he said like, I do the decision. This is this, that is that. And so I said, oh, well, that's a bit sad to me. I hope it will change in the future, and I'll lift it there. But it's to say that it's exactly 100.
That's a good example.
It's not exactly, because society is different, but it could be it's almost exactly the same as someone who walks their dog and then eat dog.
It's the same.
Well, but for the fact that society doesn't breed, like Western society doesn't breed dogs to eat them.
Yeah.
So for that guy, it's just like if someone does that with his dog and says that to anyone, everyone's going to be grossed out.
Yeah.
Like the guy who walks his pig and says, I'm eating pork, like people are going to be, they're going to make the same difference in their mind that he's doing, right? So it's because of the norms of society that he's able to do it.
Yeah.
So even having his own pet as a dog, his own pet being a pig doesn't stop him, doesn't bridge that gap, right? So some people are just so much not there yet, right? And I think it's a process. And some people might never really feel. And I think that to go back to that question of like being emotional about it, it's not like emotional like you're going to cry about it every day, but it's like it makes so much sense. And if you only understand from an intellectual point of view, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be so hard.
It's going to be easy.
It's going to be so hard. It's like someone who wants to make, I think if you want to go on a diet, like to lose weight, and you have to remind yourself it's not pleasant, you're not doing it for a higher goal, you're doing it like to look better, which is very superficial. And if it's not for health reasons, right? If it's just to look better on the beach, you might get through it, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging, right? Being vegan, is it hard emotionally? Like most of the time. Like unless when you get backlash, it's not comfortable, but it makes you happier, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is by far the single happiest thing that ever happened to my life. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. When I think about me becoming vegan, the fact that I became vegan, it makes me want to cry. Like, honestly, makes me want to cry. I was like, it's the happiest thing that ever happened to my life because it got really things into place where things really make sense to me now. I mean, that was the problem. Not being vegan was probably the problem for the rest of my life. And being vegan now gives sense to everything in terms of how I relate to my environment, how I relate to people around me. It's a full circle now. And it's definitely a reason for being extremely, extremely happy because you lose all those contradictions that you have. And I remember I was shocked. You know, I made a post on a few years ago that was on Mixi about dolphins getting killed. It's like many years ago, like 10 years ago, I don't know. And one of the Japanese, a few people in the audience said, "Yeah, hypocrite, you still let cows getting killed, but you're against dolphins getting killed. How hypocrite is that?" And I was really like, "No, it's not a hypocrite. These animals are so beautiful, and look, these are dolphins, and this is a cow." But somewhere in me is like, they were right. I mean, they are right. I mean, by that time, I was like, yeah, they was right, but there is something wrong. They're right, but there is something wrong. I mean, no, it's wrong. Killing dolphins is wrong. Killing cows is not. And you can come up with, I had the same examples recently where, I mean, a few months ago where I posted something about dolphins and somebody else, about being vegan, and somebody criticized me and it's like, yeah, I mean, how about Japanese killing dolphins? And it's like, yeah, but Japanese killing dolphins is not better than Australians killing cows. And the person was offended. It was really offended. It was like, how can you dare to say this? Dolphins are not, cows are not endangered. And I mean, it's easy to find answers to those questions. But the person was really offended. And I think that it comes back to ego and belief. Ego is believing, beliefs. You accumulate a certain number of beliefs. Can be, your nationality. Can be your sexual definition. You define yourself as a man or as a woman or as an American or as an Indian. I don't know. You define yourself as something. You have to define yourself as something. And then you have all those beliefs, all these this stellar system of beliefs, where you have so many beliefs that you don't even know our beliefs. So if I tell you, okay, being a man is a belief, I'm convinced it is a belief now. But if I tell people, you believe you're a man, it's like, what were you talking about? I'm a guy. I mean, you know, what do you mean? I'm not. It's a belief. I mean, that's another conversation. But people believe in things so deep that they don't even know it's a belief.
Yeah, they don't see the story.
They don't see the story. Yeah. They don't. So you can expect people to react when you tell them about a fact, and when you believe that it's okay to eat a pig, it's not having a pig is not what's going to make you change. I believe it's a trigger, and my wife is not vegan. One of the things that shocked me the most is when she gets ham at home. I can tell you how many times I took the ham and I felt sorry, but I threw the ham away so that my family doesn't have to eat it. And it's not convenient. You have to go and buy ham. But I mean, by doing it, I thought about it. I was like, I'm doing it. I know it's a waste of food, but this is not food. And I'm throwing it. And because we don't have it, it's not convenient. You're going to have to go and buy it. And it's going to take a while before you realize that you don't have ham in the fridge, because it's not natural. You eat it because it's there, but if it wasn't there, you wouldn't eat it. And it kind of works. There is less ham overall, right? But the reason why I'm saying this is because I know that if I raise the awareness about, I tried many ways, it doesn't work. But if I had a pig at home, it would definitely change the game.
All right.
That's what it means. Right?
All right. Yeah, I don't know if I can really relate there exactly, but I share some amount of your frustration about loved ones. I turned vegan when I was with my ex. She's still omnivore. She had vegan friends at the time. She's half from the States, half from Japan, and very well educated, and very smart. Like, she's very smart when she expresses herself, like philosophy major in law. So that definitely she can express her own opinions very clearly. And we had debates, discussions when I was very emotional about things, still more than now, which is a good thing when it's when you're aware of it. When you're just in the middle of it, you're overwhelmed. It
can
makes
be damaging.
Poor. You're a poor advocate for it.
Yeah.
And not that I have more confidence that I could convince her now, but it's definitely something I have no clear answer yet, whether now being single, especially a relationship, a romantic relationship with one of the partner being vegan, the other being non-vegan. Well, even if it's vegetarian, right? If your significant other eats eggs in front of you, you're not seeing the egg. You're seeing the process that brought this egg on the table. And a lot of that is so abysmally unethical that if you think about it, it's going to ruin your meal and it's going to impact your relationship at that time. So I can understand where the throwing the ham things come from. I'm trying to figure out if not answers, to the questions that are like kind of bugging me right now regarding human relationships and handling those kind of situations. I'm actually reading a book right now by Dr. Melanie Joy. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I haven't read it. But...
Yeah, I've read her book about carnism, which is kind of interesting, but draws on a bit too long. It's why we love dogs, wear cows, and eat pigs, something like that. It's interesting, but I don't think it's going to convince anyone. Maybe a few, but it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the best tool to convince most people to think about. Well, at least to think about maybe, but not to change their habits.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm reading a second book by her, which is about handling relationships between vegan, non-vegans, etc. How to express your own point of views in a constructive, like in a positive way, and make things work even within couples that would be vegan, non-vegan. And it's a very in-depth book. I mean, you have to be okay with a lot of psychotherapy-ish babble, and I don't, like, I just offered that book for my father's birthday, which was yesterday, and I wrote as a message on the Amazon card, this is not meant to convince you, it's meant for us to better understand one another. So it's kind of, let's build a better bridge. And we only have a very good bridge with my father because he read Animal Liberation 2 years ago almost. After I asked him to do so, he's mostly pescatarian, etc. So we're discussing the issue a lot. But last summer, when I was back in Brussels after like series of different things, like interactions with family, etc. Not direct family, but direct family, but a bit like that I don't see often at all. We discussed about my reactions there, not wanting to eat this or that, whatever. And he said, I understand you. He said, I understand you, or something like that. And I said, no, you don't. Right.
Maybe he accepts you.
No, it wasn't about acceptance.
Okay, it was about
understanding. And because he read the material, he watched, not the minute, but like from farm to fridge, which is a horrendous 12 minutes of violence.
Yeah.
So he read all that, and so he knows, right? And that's where that was what I was talking about earlier. He knows.
Yeah.
Right? He knows, but he doesn't feel it as much. And there's a lot of reasons to that. And I don't explain it, but maybe it's mostly rooted in the fact that he's lived twice as long as me in a society that
didn't question
as much, right? And so it's about putting your own self identity, that part of it, in the balance is very uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And so
I can relate to that.
And so he told me, he said something like, I understand you regarding, like, for example, dairy products. And I said, no, you don't, because if you were understanding me, you wouldn't be able to say something like, but one dry sausage once in a while, or burger or something like that. You wouldn't, because those are not things that are like neutral. They're heavy. Like and it's not like, and every food has some impact on some living beings around the world, right? You don't have zero impact, but damn, butter and the way it's made, I mean, unless you're making it 100% yourself from the cow you have in your garden, and like everything is, and even ideally I wouldn't probably eat it, but it's so, it's horrible, right? The process to get it. And once you start seeing that, and so this book, the second book from Dr. Melanie Joy, addresses this from different perspectives. I haven't finished reading it, and I offered him that book because, well, ideally he's going to make him understand, and that will lead to more change. But I don't think even if he gets vegan 100% and he really feels strongly about it, I don't think it's going to change much about, for example, his wife, as like my stepmother, she's from the Philippines, getting her to consider fish as something else than just food is probably not going to work. And it's not like, I don't even think this as being one of my goals, but just to say that this is probably, if we're talking about how incredible it is to be vegan as far as like being more consistent with your values, and that makes you super happy. But let's be honest here, it's not easy to be vegan in a society that is almost non-vegan at all, right?
Yeah, no.
And it makes you even prouder of yourself somewhere. So it kind of reinforces if you stick to it, you're happy about being it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if my ex, we didn't break up because of that, but if she had at some point shown signs that she was reconsidering her views on food, etc., it would have strengthened the connection much more, right? And connection with people, I in my classroom, I have a few quotes here and there, and one of which, probably the best one, is life is about connections.
Yeah.
Connection with human beings, but connection with all sentient beings. And that's where my veganism comes from.
Yeah.
When I'm being asked why, especially when I'm being asked with someone that I know I'm not going to debate with, and I want to be a bit like kind of cheesy about it, I say, yeah, it's all about love. And I think that's where it comes from, right?
Yeah,
and that's why you don't need to study all the material forever to really feel strongly about it.
Yeah. I completely, I agree with that. I mean, no, it's definitely not easy. I mean, when I'm my role as a professional is, I'm in a commercial role, and I have to meet people and have to have a high level of social connections at work. And I have to tell you, it changed a lot. And also because I'm supposed to be a leader. I'm a manager, and people report to me. And all of a sudden, when I made that change, my clients didn't know what to do. My clients, or my partners at work and people at work, and you also have to realize the impact you have on people. You have a huge impact on people, and I think about my own family. I think about my wife, and and it definitely changed our relationship. I wouldn't say in a good way. I think there are still scars of the fact that I became vegan. But I don't blame myself, because I think I in some cases it's worse than what's happening to me. And we managed to make it work, right? We make it work pretty well, and I'm accepted. It's okay. Some people don't accept it, and they even separate because of this, right? But you have to realize the impact you have on people around you. And I imagine. So my wife is trying to raise my children as carnists in just the way that everybody's raised, right? Because she doesn't want them to feel that they're different. But they do ask themselves a lot of questions, because for years they grew up seeing their father eating something different than what they eat. And every meal's dishes are different. And we are going to restaurants, and like yesterday, my entire family was in Ripple having a burger with my wife, and my wife was completely okay going there with my kids, and my kids loved it. They love it, but then my wife, after the restaurant, she's like, she has to find her own food. Right?
Oh, she didn't eat there?
She ate, but she doesn't like it.
Oh, well, so, for taste, or for the fact that there's no animal products?
Taste, but it's both. And I've seen so many examples of that, by the way. It's not just my wife, but many people feel that it's not food, it's not complete.
Because you wouldn't be able to tell, right? If you're, some foods are clearly not the best vegan food advocate for people who are liking their meat or something related to that, or fish. But some foods you wouldn't even be able to tell.
Right. So in this case, let's take the example of Ripple. And Ripple it's amazingly delicious.
Yeah, it's a burger joint, but they're very well done.
It's not healthy,
No.
And I had a lot of unhealthy food yesterday. And I still feel it.
And then the chocolate?
And then the chocolate. So I had like one of the worst days in my life in terms of being healthy. But it is tasty.
It is.
But it doesn't taste, like if you take the burger, for example, it doesn't taste the same as meat.
Yeah, but then I would argue, and it's true, and when I go to Ripple, I always get the same thing. They don't have that much options, right? But I always get the falafel burger because I just love falafels. And the soy chicken one, which is soy chicken, I don't especially love it at all. I don't think it's close enough to chicken. And if it was close enough, I wouldn't want it anyways because that would a bit gross me out.
We're coming to
it. But I think that for someone who's not vegan or not vegetarian, if they had a soy chicken burger that was, and I had some karaage, like the chicken nugget.
It's pretty close.
Style. I had some at, I think one of the last Lopongi Pink Cow vegan meetups that was so close to what I remember of the real thing. And I remember it pretty vividly being vegan for only so short a time, that I was a bit, I took some more to really get this in my mouth and be like, this is uncomfortable, right?
Okay, so can I tell you, I had the same experience when I had my first Beyond Meat.
Oh yeah, that's what I was coming to, because I think that if she was eating something like that.
But it was not like that. To her, it was, and I can understand that, it was, the taste is particular, is not close enough, I think, in her eyes. And she doesn't, maybe that's cognitive. And I'm pretty sure it's cognitive somewhere.
But if she didn't know that the Beyond Meat burger was plant-based, and
I think that if she doesn't know, she will eat it.
So no.
And she will love it.
Yeah, but she would because my question was about, you told me she wanted to get some other food afterwards, right? And if that's something that's not punctual, but that happens frequently whenever she gets a full plant-based meal, that she feels like something is lacking, then I would argue sometimes it might be really the feeling.
You're right.
Most of the time it would be like just psychological.
It's intellectual. Right? It is. And I give you a beautiful example that I had this morning. My daughter, when it's me, I don't give them milk. I give them soy milk. So I gave my daughter soy milk and my son soy milk. My son is really into my diet, and he's like, that's the right thing to do. And
around 7?
He's 7, and so he's like, I love it, I want it because it doesn't hurt animals, and he's really following it. But my daughter, who's 5, is like, I don't like Tonio, I want milk, I want real milk. And he said, no, I said, because she always leaves milk. So I said, no, you have to drink it. He said, but I don't like, it's Tonio, I don't like it. And I was like, no, it's milk. Oh, really? And she drank it. And she was drinking it, and I said, and my son was like, okay, but how about me? What is it? It's soy milk, right? And I said, yeah, it's soy milk. And then my daughter said, so how about mine? Is it milk or soy milk? And I said, it's soy milk. But she was drinking it, and it was good, so she drank it, right? It was just, it's psychological, I think, most of the time. There's a lot of it, yeah.
Although I would argue that those two beverages have very different tastes.
Yeah.
So I can understand how some people might prefer the taste of dairy milk. Now, the thing with milk, I think the more I hear about milk, and we can talk about all the ethical issues, but the sheer fact that it's very not well balanced for human physiology, even if you're lactose tolerant, especially when you grow up as a kid, and I was drinking milk all the time, right? So it definitely doesn't make someone like a unfunctional human being, but all the hormonal disruptors that are involved in drinking milk, etc. We get that from a lot of other elements in our modern life, right? And food and etc. But milk is really even if it's not full of residues from antibiotics, etc. it's still made for a living being that's going to grow tremendous amount in size, the calf to the cow, in a very short time. And if you're feeding that to your kids, it's definitely going to impact the way they grow up. Like maybe most people would argue for the better, but apparently it's not especially the case. And it's related to cancer and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Florent, you know, I grew up as a milk lover. And part of the reasons why I loved milk was because I loved cows. And I loved cows so much that I wanted one. And my family had promised me I would get one on my veranda or something.
All right.
And I believed in it. I believed that, and I did drink a lot of milk, and milk was by far my favorite beverage.
I used to love it too.
And I believe that, I think, you know, I drank some soy milk recently that tastes almost like cow milk.
Does it?
Yeah, there was one variety, but also some other varieties that are very easy to drink, that do not have the inconveniences for someone who doesn't like soy milk. But I believe that in the same way that we managed, that Beyond Burgers and Beyond Meat exist, and now we have Beyond Sausages, and we have Beyond Tofu, right? And cheese is becoming, it's
becoming like cheese for people like us coming from a cheese-heavy culture.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I gave up cheese when I started living in Japan. So to me, going vegan here was in some way easier than if I had been in a world where
I didn't.
So you still were getting cheese when you were in Japan before being vegan here?
I was getting cheese. I was getting some
regularly?
of the best cheese.
Yeah, because it's twice as expensive, right?
It's twice as expensive. I would get some of the best cheese.
Sometimes I would have some. I even had a raclette thing at my place, but maybe once a month or something like that.
Less, definitely less.
Yeah. It's not every day, right?
No, not every day.
My family, my sister is probably eating cheese every day.
Yeah. Every day, right? And
every day it's normal.
We have those huge desserts, right, with tens of varieties of cheese.
That
right?
exists too. That's the exception, not the rule. But the rule for me was cheese every day.
Yeah, cheese every day. I mean, cheese is in the fridge.
Yeah.
I mean, even in Japan, I had cheese in the fridge.
Okay.
It was cheese in the fridge, and I would be the only one eating it. Drink, the same thing. I would be the only one drinking milk. My wife was not, before I became vegan, almost not drinking milk. It's almost a reaction.
Oh, is that so? Is she drinking milk now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, milk is in the fridge. Before I was vegan, there was not as much milk in the fridge.
Okay.
So I think it's more like resistance.
Well, it's not meat and it's animal products, so it's maybe one way to get those nutrients that she might think are important and missing from plant-based.
But I think it's definitely, to me, by the way, that's a great example. That's a great it's a great experience. It's not an easy experience, but it's working. But I could draw a lot of conclusions because I can see how what you just mentioned is so true. It's plant-based misses something. It misses meat. So, for example, at home we cook the same dish, and then there's going to be one with meat and the other one without. Most Japanese dishes you can make. But there's always the plant-based one and the meat one. So I think since I became vegan, there has been more meat in the fridge because of resistance. It's psychological, but I think so. Because there is a risk. There is tension around the fact that I might become vegan as well.
I see. All right. Yeah.
So you have to resist. It's wrong, so you have to resist, right?
Okay. Well, I hope that's going to change for the better. Let's say in the next few years. But I hadn't thought about that. But definitely, I think the fact that most people feel like they're meal is lackluster, it's not satisfying without animal products, it's very, very few times an honest reaction based on the taste, but most of the time it's almost purely cultural and habits and psychological. So changing the environment, which is happening, like maybe less in, definitely less in Japan than in other Western countries. And I say other Western countries because by economical standards, Japan is a Western country, but changing the norms there is going to change the way people feel about their food. And it's not about changing the food has to adapt to some extent, right? All the Beyond Burgers, etc., Beyond Meat are going to help tremendously there. And if cultured meat explodes in the next 10 years, then that's going to be probably the solution to 90% of the problems related to factory farming. And you don't even have to be vegan anymore to be ethical as far as your diet goes, which would be so nice for the planet. But even if that doesn't happen, I think changing the norms and making veganism much more normal, not mainstream, like not something that most people do, but something that even like, let's imagine 10-20% of people. And I think numbers are in that range for millennials, for example, in US or UK or France. Like if you look at millennials, like young adults, it's quite a wide range of people. And now, how long are they staying vegan or not? That I don't really know. But if you look at those numbers compared to like 10, 20 years ago, it's night and day.
It's exploding. It's exploding.
And in Japan, you don't feel it that much. So
no, you don't.
You read about it and you're like a bit frustrated. But there's still a lot of options here, and the community is pretty awesome as far as.
It's awesome, and it's changing so fast. Yeah. It's unbelievable, and when I live around Yoyogi, and it's exploding in the region.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I live in a place where there's nothing, so.
And I can understand that, and And if I look at, and even convenience stores now have options, and it's vegan, the vegan sign, the vegan label.
You see it sometimes, depending on the store, depending on the brand of product.
Yeah, you
start to see it.
Sometimes, but you see it now. And even 3 years ago, you couldn't see it, spot it, and now it's coming. And now I see Japanese people vegan.
Well, apparently, I talked with Tracy from the Pink Cow this week, and she told me something I wasn't aware of about how the big earthquake in 2011 rose a lot of awareness for more environment-friendly diets, so plant-based diets mostly among Japanese people. So I knew that.
It's interesting.
I knew that the vegan community in Japan was in Tokyo. I would say in Tokyo was very much like there was a lot of foreigners in it, right? And not a lot of Japanese. And then Nadia told me that a few years ago it started to change, especially when the Meetup webpage was accepting Japanese input for text, and Saudi was helping with the Japanese side of things a lot.
Yeah.
And they got more and more Japanese people, but apparently there's like almost 100%, I would suppose, or maybe even 100% Japanese people, vegan groups, communities in Tokyo that I didn't really know about. And that's great.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I think I saw my wife feeding my children, and when you're a mother in Japan, you do eat a lot of fish.
Yeah.
I mean, not raw fish, but fish, because it gives you, a certain number of nutrients, and it's part of culture here to eat fish. And when you breastfeed with your milk has some of the fish that you ate.
Yeah, heavy metals and stuff like that in it too.
Including this, but I'm also talking about the taste.
Oh yeah, true.
And when children start to eat, some of the first thing they eat is fish. So deep in your childhood, you were fed with fish. And in the same way, we were fed with cheese and
dairy
milk
products.
and dairy products when we were kids.
Bread.
It's good bread, right? Which I still love.
Oh, bread. You mean what?
Bread.
Oh yeah, no, but bread you can get it vegan and
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here to get good and satisfying bread is a bit like getting good and satisfying cheese. You need to look for it and pay for it.
Yeah, pay for it, but you can get it. But I mean, you get fed this stuff, and it makes it even harder as an adult to switch. And I think that Japan the history of Japan makes it, and I mean, you've studied history, and it was before World War II, one of the most vegan-friendly country in the world.
Well, I would say vegetarian though, because with all the fish stock they have everywhere.
But even fish stock, because fish was not as accessible.
Yeah, so maybe it
World
was
War
more
II.
like kombu stock and stuff like that.
That's why they have kombu stock and shiitake stock, and because in Japanese history, and the same, Japanese probably, I need to look deeper into that, but they've been influenced by Buddhism.
Yeah.
And it's one of the first countries in the world where it is the first country in the world actually where it became forbidden to kill dogs.
It's probable. Yeah, I remember there was it's a shogun mandate. I think it's in the 7th. Is it in the? I think it's the 18th century. Something like that. Is the shogun named Ienobu? Something like that. I could look that up. Yeah, I remember studying that.
And so the Japanese, feudal government was not in favor of having people eating a lot of meat, and also it's a lot of work to get meat killed, conserved, preserved, and processed, especially at that time. So fish was the same, and Japan is not just about the ocean. There's a lot of continental population. It was hard to get, so that's why they've developed so much science around tofu and.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Right?
I mean, the history of the country is definitely more going towards plant-based and was plant-based for most of them. But that's true worldwide, right? But for the elites, if you take the whole of humanity since the beginning of Homo sapiens, we're a plant-based organism, right? Meat is the exception in our diet, but for the last 50, 100 years, and guess why there's so much health problem related to diet recently? Well, you might have all the nutrients. Well, it's not true. You don't get all the nutrients you need. There's less problem of malnutrition as far as deficiencies overall in Western countries, but overnutrition and deficiency in some areas are so prevalent that's related to chronic disease, diabetes, heart attack, depression, because inflammation leads to depression as well when it's based on physiology there. And
Florent, I think we need to get more data about Japan. Is a very interesting country because people definitely changed. I mean, physically in Japan over the few
after the war,
recent years.
Especially
after the war, but even recently, I would say in the last 10 years.
Oh, really?
10 to 20 years. Because dairy has exploded in Japan in the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, having numbers would be very interesting there because I studied a bit through university, etc., and my own readings of books, how post-World War II, there was a rise in colon cancer and everything related to more American style diet.
And now it's very common. It's very common.
Although I would say that despite that, Japan is still viewed as a very healthy country as far as diet because of how little obesity they get compared to the United States, which is mind-bogglingly obese now. It's even in some populations, in some age groups, it's 50% overweight. Let's just imagine one of two people being overweight and the costs for healthcare and etc.
Japan doesn't have
that yet. I don't know if they'll get it at some point, but definitely
they do have. There are problems. I mean,
definitely. There's more and more problems.
There's more and more problems.
More and more problems. It's still like overall, I think the fact that Japanese love their Japanese food, and that's still the staple.
And it still has less meat.
Yeah, it's less. The portion sizes are not as big.
Not as big.
This is a fascinating topic, and there's so much more I'd love for us to chat about, but believe it or not, we've been recording for like what? Just let me bring up the real number here. Almost 3 hours. Wow. With the break times. This is my longest.
The break times was really long. It was 5 minutes.
And also, as I said, I have to be
in
half an hour
longest,
in near Harajuku. So I suggest we finish this podcast here, and whether it's just the two of us without microphones and in French probably if it's just the two of us, or
continue that conversation.
Another episode at some point.
Sure.
I would love to hear more about everything related to plant-based and more than that.
Definitely, let's do that. Thank you.
Awesome.
It was great.
Thanks very much, Pascal.
Thanks.
And see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the ciplantgo podcast. Ciplantgo is also on Instagram and Facebook at ciplantgo. There you can have a look at the latest things going on in my plant-based life in Japan. There is also an email address, ciplantgo@gmail.com. Feel free to send me a message, whether it's to ask a question, give me suggestions for ciplantgo, or anything else. Have a great rest of the day, and until next time.